Hi there, Randy Green here. We are ending October 2021 and it is today the 30th, and all depending on how you add up the numbers, it's either a 3, 4, 9 or a lesser positive 3, 13, 18. And there is this double a type of energy in this talk and in the thoughts and the processes I am dealing with today. And I want to touch a little bit ground with some of the, what you could say, the ideas and imbalances of thinking, feeling, existing, what have you. It's a little bit in the heavy end, so now you're kind of warned. It is existential, but it's also a kind of contemplation. And for those of you who do not understand the word contemplation because it's new to you, it is a concept that is within all ancient religions and esoteric teaching systems, where you contemplate. You ask and you shall be given does not mean that you ask and you will get some materialistic stuff. It actually means you ask a question, you meditate upon it or contemplate, because contemplation is a combining of meditation and using your inner knowledge. Meditation in itself is more like kind of silencing the inner voice, getting to the still point, learning to observe yourself and your dynamics. You can call that scanning yourself if you like in a more modern terminology. And it's like learning to observe the processes of yourself, be in the now as we see it in mindfulness. And in that have this complete understanding of who and what you are and all of your inner processes. That's technically what meditation is supposed to be in my point of view, following the ancient Buddhist teaching systems. And I want to go a little bit in that direction today with the Buddhist teaching systems. But to go back to the difference between when you do thinking, most of you are thinking within the frames of references you have been induced with via the school system, internet, education, and what have you. And when we talk about thinking, and this is a little bit along the lines of philosophy as well, is that when you think, you are processing information within a frame of reference, within a context. And the questions you ask will always be within that context. The answers will be contextual. So that means that if you ask about something, whatever it is, it will be within your frame of reference. It will be from where you have your foundational knowledge. And this comes into the relativity of knowledge as well, because there's not one truth. There's not, this is how reality is. That's what the scientists wanted us to believe in the 1900s. But we are now in the 21st century, and we now know that, that is, or yes, we know that is not true, that knowledge is not a tangible thing you can put into boxes and then you have it and store it on a shelf, but it is changing as our human brains are changing. As we develop more knowledge, our matrix of knowledge change as well. Our questions will develop, they will progress in a way. And you can say, when we talk about what's the purpose of our system, it has been called a school in many different spiritual teaching systems. And it always kind of relates to the idea that the schooling is about the soul, and the soul learns through different sufferings, through different challenges, through different choice makings. That all goes with what we could call the psychological structure. And that is the beginning of it, naturally. Psychology, or learning who you are and what you are and why you're doing this, is very important. But once you kind of got the psychology, knowing thyself to the dot, as the miracle or the oracle of Delphi said, you need know thyself and you will know the answers of the world. Well, then you kind of are ready to begin to work in a broader context. That kind of means yourself and others. That kind of goes with the first step of the psychological work, because that is always in a spectrum of you and others and how you interact with others. You are not an island in yourself. You are always interacting with other people, and even deprived by other people. Your brain will continue to create a sort of inner chatter we've seen in Robinson and so forth, where where it creates something it can project a relationship onto, as we saw it in the movie with Tom Hanks, and he projects this on a coconut, and he literally almost falls in love with his coconut because he needs that relationship. He needs to relate to something. And we're seeing it with people that have no contact with humans. They have an animal, or they have their garden. They have something they can relate to, something that gives meaning to them. So having something that is meaningful must be in a context of a relation of some sort. And others do the relation with God. We see it as nuns that are kind of what do you call it, engaged with Jesus. They are his brides, to put it that way. So they are engaged with Jesus, which is kind of, for me, completely ridiculous. But I understand the notion. I understand the idea. I understand this vowing yourself to the work of Jesus, to the work of the soul, to Christianity as a religion. And again, creating a relation that makes you have a place in the world, because you need to have a place in the world. You need to have a meaning, a purpose. So this is again very existential way of thinking. And if you kind of say, okay, Randy, where are you talking from? What is your background? Let me just remind you, I am a licensed psychotherapist. I have licensed myself within that branch of psychotherapy that is called existentialism, as well as family dynamics, as well as relationship dynamics. So this is all about, that's my foundation, but I already had it before that. It's always been one of my greatest questions in life: God, human, reality, these kind of things from a very early age. So I've contemplated on that from the very beginning. The moment I began being able to think, I thought about what's the purpose of life. Literally. So that's kind of my core foundation. And with that, always ask, looking at the world from that foundation, what's the purpose of life? And I want to go a little bit back to that in 2 seconds. But then also, when I have I also have a bachelor degree in theology, which means I've studied the Bible in ancient Hebrew. I studied the Gospels in ancient Greek and in Latin, and I've gone through several semesters being taught philosophy, cultural settings, how to interpret ancient text, how to work with the languages, the cultural settings, and how does language reflect the cultural settings, how you to interpret the ideas within the cultural settings. And of course, we can say we are still imposing a sort of a present day understanding of ancient cultures, because we still refer to what we know of today, and we kind of try and backdate it back into how it was 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, imposing to some degree our ideas on the archaeological finds, even though we are, due to many different texts and what have you, can still see some kind of, okay, this is perhaps more or less how they thought. You train yourself into being able to detach yourself from what you're observing and trying to perceive it within the matrix or the context or the contextual frame of reference that you have when you work with ancient ideas or ancient text or ancient material or ancient archaeology find. But you will always be trapped with that. You can only interpret it from where you are now, so to speak. And that goes the other way around if you kind of look into the future, and if you were by some weird accident or something happened that led people from the future coming back and meeting us, they would also meet us with their frame of references, and we would look at them with our frame of references, and onward and so forth. You know, the mental process of this, that you kind of, if you imagine that you would travel back in time and you would brought your iPhone with you, how would Neanderthals perceive that thing? They would probably step on it and destroy it and be afraid of it, because it's shone light, what have you. They would not be able to read the apps, and they would not be able to understand the function of it. So again, all of this trying to find the truth is literally impossible. And I want you to keep that in mind, because this has been some of the, remember, I'm born in the 60s, so growing up and seeing the world change as I have, and still remembering it, fortunately, and remembering how things were in the 80s and how they were in the 90s. And sometimes I like to go on YouTube or find some old documentary or something that is filmed at that time, so you can look at these people and say, wow, humans were so different than they were technically what I would call humans. When I look around now, I don't really see many humans, but But again, this is all about the context I have from where I perceive what I'm looking at. Again, this control of the mind. So when we really go down to the nitty-gritty details of what are our tools to work with when we perceive reality, it's not knowledge itself, even though that our system has been called a school, and everything that you work with when you work with the other realities that are part of our system, it's all about controlling knowledge. And we're seeing that to a degree as well today. It's the theme. That's the foundational theme of everything. Knowledge and the control of knowledge. Just put that in mind as well. So that's why we call it a school. But many people, when they work with reincarnation and they have this is a school and you've been reborn here so you can learn, it is always viewed upon the psychological structure. It's firstly viewed as the psychological structure. And you have books of Michael Newton that kind of confirms this. You have it within religion. It's always the psychological structure that humans are not developed enough, that we are not good people. We are not moral people. We're not doing the ethical right thing to do, and we have to be more honorable. And it's all about the human constitution. It's always about this fucking self. And I want to change it a little bit, but into the purpose of life and what is really a school, when you kind of say, well, is it about the psychological processes? That's the first step of it, but can we move it further? And this is where we can go into the mental processes or the processes of thinking, where science has its part, where you begin to look at reality. And science and mental processes and reality are kind of the connection that needs to be done there, to put it in a little bit schematic way. So psychology is all about yourself and how you are in the world and with others, where the sciences is all about reality and how reality is constructed and how do you process that information in your brain. Okay, so this is where we lift it up to the brain. But the brain itself and the mental processes and the thinking processes and philosophy, which is also part of a mental exercise, can easily be trapped in its own processes, as emotions can, as physical sensations can. You have people that are getting kind of addicted to the emotional rush, and we have different races here that are addicted to the emotional rush of human emotions. And they are literally affecting the emotional field to get people to respond with these electrochemical spikes of different forms of energies from which these entities can grow stronger and become even more ingrained into the emotional field. As well as physical sensation, the physical sensation is all about desires and sexual activity, and people can get completely addicted to the processes of the body and what the body can do, whether it is alcohol or cigarettes or sugar rush or sexual rush or caffeine rush or what have you, all of these processes of the body that can create addiction. And then the same with the mind. You can have an addiction of thought as well. I've seen these people. They're all about thinking, and they're brilliant thinkers, but they lost contact with the world, so to speak, and they get more and more skinny and more weird to look at. And not to say anything wrong about Stephen Hawking, I know it's an illness, but for me, it is that kind of the whole body deteriorating and then being linked up to a computer. It's kind of the first example of what happens when people completely stop having a body and stop having emotions. Not that he's emotionless, not at all. I'm not saying that. But then you get, your body withers away and you get connected to a computer, and you then let the computer talk for you, but you're thinking and you're this brilliant mind. It's kind of this brain in a jar thing kind of going. And I'm not saying Stephen Hawking is anything like it, but he is an exemplification of something. He has this brilliant mind in spite of his complete bodily deterioration. And there is something to that. It's not his fault, not blaming him whatsoever. But there are many different ways that human forms can exist and express themselves as part of this reality field. I'm just putting it in context because now with the whole, we know where everything is going. People are getting more and more connected to the internet, which is a symbolic representation of information, right? Knowledge, but it's virtual knowledge. It is made by humans, but it's made within the context of virtual knowledge, virtual reality. And we know where it's going with the new tendencies that are coming. Everything is pointing in that direction, that everything will be processed by AI and algorithms and computers and stuff, and will be linked up to them, whatever that means. We have seen plenty of movies that leads us in that direction, where everything becomes a virtual reality. People sit in their living room withering away, playing video games all day long, and now when they can get the goggles on and they can completely be linked up there, that is what they will see. I even saw last summer or 2 summers ago, a guy out, I was out in nature, we were out walking, and this guy, he was in nature, having goggles on that kind of let him see his airplane or his little plane or whatever in some kind of 4 or 5 dimensional, what have you, something. But he had technology on. He was in nature, but he was viewing nature via technology similar to the Pokemon game we had a couple of years ago, where reality and virtual reality got merged together. And this is the future because humans want to be entertained. They want this running away from reality, because reality as we know of it, let's be honest, it's fucking boring, right? It is fucking boring, especially if you're driven by desire energy, or you're driven by energetic parasites that want electrochemical rushes, or you're driven by mental processes of learning to learn and then just keep learning and creating virtual reality or science fiction movies where things can get more and more complicated and more crazy, to put it that way, in the line of thought what humans can engineer and make up and come up with. And in the end, it's all kind of boring. So this is where we end. If you have a natural process of the spectra of the physical energies, the spectra of emotional energy, and the spectra of mental processes, you will come to this cessation. It will kind of burn out eventually. Kind of, yeah, been there, done that so far, so many times. How many times do a chocolate bar, the first pieces are nice, they taste good. The rest of the bar is just kind of overload because you already got the satisfaction of the first 2 pieces of it. So why not save the rest and then eat it later on? So things get stale, that get boring, and this is where people that are driven by these different energies within themselves, they will push it. They get so bored that they are traveling with rockets out in space and spending enormous amount of money, because then that's the rush that they can get. What more rush can you get? The adrenaline rush is over. The rush of creating an empire is over. The rush of having 10 wives is over. The rush of earning your first billion is over. So this is kind of, then you push it and you find something that gets more and more extreme. And if you don't know how to limit yourself, we know how that one goes. Then it goes into, all depending on if it's physical or if it's emotional or if it's mental, these spectra then gets more and more expanded until they literally break the laws and become something that is part of a horror movie, because you want that rush of whatever that means. So when we come to this psychological understanding of the school and the purpose of life, where you can say the school is all about knowledge, about learning. So what do you do with the knowledge that you get? What do you use that knowledge for? And that's the litmus test. What do you use that knowledge for? You know it all. You remember the Indiana Jones with the crystal skulls, and this Russian scientist who says, I want to know it all. And she gets all of the information from these crystal beings, whatever they are, 5th dimensional crystal beings, and she literally blows up with all of this knowledge because it was too much. Her cells couldn't contain that high vibration, radiation type of energy. So she blew up, and there you have it, burned all up in all of the knowledge. And she got all of this, getting all of the answers. So getting the answers is part of the quest, but what do we get the answers for? This is what we need to ask ourselves. Why do we search answers? Why do we search knowledge? What is it to be used for? As well as you could say, well, if you do the path of liberation, it's kind of walking through the different steps of the programs and learning to play the programs and learn to conquer the program and learn to take out the program, so to speak. That would be that quest, so to speak, and as well as being able to do the trials within the holographic realities. It's like a screwed up video game. Whereas if you do the path of progression, to put it in a little bit more context that we can kind of relate to in our everyday perception of reality, it is like this constant evolution of yourself for the purpose of evolving yourself. So you kind of say in one is the path of liberation is to beat the program, where the other one is to literally get to that point where you can say, well, I am mastering this. It's about mastery. It's both types of mastery, and it's both related to purpose and it's both related to knowledge. But the question, what is the outcome? And this is always where we need to ask ourselves when we dive into something. What's the outcome? What is the goal? What is driving me? And what is the purpose of this? And then as you move along, in the beginning, you think the purpose of life is to get this or to get that. And you will discover that in the end, it's not the goal of getting what you're longing for. It's the process itself. You then become addicted to the process itself. And as you discover that the process loses its meaning. So you need to understand the shift. In the beginning, you have a goal. You want to achieve this or that or whatever. The goal is to get the girl, so to speak. And then you get the girl and you discover she's just as boring as everybody else. And then you set a new goal and then you go for that. And then you discover, that person or that thing or whatever, what have you, is just as boring as whatever, because the idea of something is always much more enticing than actually getting it. Unfortunately, that's one of the traps of our reality, the traps of seeking something in a goal setting, until you learn that looping and understand that desiring that is not really getting you anywhere. It's just desire energy that drives you, creates a fantasy about what that goal is. And you then reach the goal and you discover that your fantasy has very little to do with reality, and you get this big crash. And some people actually get depressed by it, or they feel sadness, or they get into all this weird emotional dysfunctional settings as kind of, what the fuck? I thought I was happy. Now I got it. And I'm so unhappy. Why am I so unhappy? And this is where people should really sit down and contemplate and say, why am I unhappy? I reached my goal. Why am I unhappy? And this is where the contemplation, working with energy and the understanding of applying knowledge in the right way, meditation, to look at things from all angles and understand the matrix of deception that you had fallen into. And by that, really saying, okay, then what's behind that? What's behind that? What's behind that? Investigate it. Using sciences to understand the reality of your desire, the reality of your programs, how they are engineered, why they're engineered that way, and what's the purpose of this. So this is a different way of approaching this. And the reason why I'm explaining this is because I'm here explaining something in complete normal human terminology you will understand without a shred of doubt, because you have already seen it and you've already experienced it. And then you will, with that understanding, also understand that what I'm trying to push here is to teach you how to learn from the processes and learn to perceive the processes in the right context and with the right purpose, as literally learning to decipher a program, understand the program, play the program, beat the program. That's the path of liberation. But as you do that, you gain an enormous amount of knowledge, which will then teach you how to evolve on the path of progression. You will evolve with the purpose of evolving itself, because that's the purpose of life. Life is about changes. It's about developing. It's about gaining knowledge, but it's using this knowledge to evolve, not as in a goal setting to beat the program. That's the path of liberation, and do the trial so you can get your template structure back or what have you, or get rid of the seals. That's the path of liberation. That's the path of the warrior. And the warrior gets tired eventually, because the warrior knows that the goal is not the purpose. It's not just about winning this war. It's not just about conquering an enemy. It's not just about going out there, lifting your sword and chopping things away and killing and slaying until you reach the victory state and you become the one that's part of Valhalla or what have you, or you end up in heaven alongside with whoever you admire to be an honorable human within the context of war. That's the path of liberation, technically, where you chop away everything to reach a certain goal, just to discover that that goal might actually be absolutely nothing. And once you have done that, understanding, then after that goal, there's another goal, and after that goal, there's another goal, and none of it ever gives you the answers. It's just a continued perpetuating circle, re-looping of things that must be fixed, and when they're fixed, something else turns up, and when that turns up, that must be fixed, and then something else turns up. Nothing nothing is ever really fixed because our system is a continued loop of things that grows into being, that manifests itself and goes into entropy and cease to exist, rise up in a new form, recreate itself, go into existence, come into in manifestation, begin the entropy, begin to crystallize, and then it dissolves and cease to be. That's our reality. That's what you need to know. That's the samsara. That's the wheel of life. You really get that one. Say, oh, that's just a continuous circle of repetitive tendencies. They might look different. They might be red. They might be blue, but it's the same fucking deal over and over and over and over again. And then you look at it and say, I'm done. And you put your sword in the sand and you blow all of these cycles away as the last thing you can do, taking away all of these programs and say, fuck you all. I'm done. I'm so fucking done. This leads to nothing. This is meaningless. It has no purpose. And then you go to the right and do the path of progression, where you look in and you say, okay, so I have evolved now. I have learned this. I have beaten the program. I know these are programs. I know these are reloops. I know what they are. I'm looking at it from above. I learned a lot about myself in the process. I'm really knowing myself. I know what I can. I know my strength. I know my weaknesses. I know where I have flaws. I know what I can do better. I've done a shitload of stupid stuff, but now I am atoning. I am making better, and I'm making that better by going into the path of progression. And that's the warrior monk that goes that way. The one that has had the sword in his or her hand and are now beginning to go for the life force instead. That way you have worked with the path of liberation in destruction and tearing down whatever existed there, the number 13. You then go to the number 3, where you create new architecture, you reconstruct, you go against the dark forces, you try to create light, you try to do good, you try to atone, you try to do it in the right way, not by suffering, not by pain, not by ridiculous happiness, because you know that's just another angle of these fluctuations in the spectrum of emotional energies. And you know the physical, what you can physically, because you got that one in control. You have literally trained yourself into becoming, physically speaking, a superhuman. You know that has limitations and needs a balance as well. You have learned how to respond emotionally and how to not respond emotionally, and you have got your balance there as well. And you know that reality is rarely what you think it to be, and you have learned to observe your mental processes in meditation, and really are getting there where you can contemplate upon things, not to contemplate on the contemplation itself or to find the answers, because the answer is just contextual anyways. They're just part of a process, and they are not the sole answer to anything. There is no such thing as the truth, but there's a process of information you can use in your progression journey. There's a process of information you can learn to master, so that you create the right thought forms, you create the right context, you create the correct frames of references that will lead to your progression. You then take everything you have learned not as a given, but as a creation. You learn that it's not given by others. This is something you engineer. And there you really begin to master energy. That's where you really get to the point where you kind of say, fuck, I know what this is about. I know I got all of this knowledge. I've done the warrior path. I've done the liberation. And in the end, I discovered that it's not the fight against others. It's not the fight against the programs. It's not a fight against the reality. It's a fight against myself and what I believe in and what I perceive myself to be. Know thyself and you will know the world. Okay. So this is where we go in, and this is where you can take, if you want to do with the Buddhist line of thought, so you can say, what's the purpose of life? This. It has no simple context. It has no simple word. It is a mastery. The purpose of life is mastery. But when we go to a little bit, I want to end it up. We're talking a little bit, putting it into the Buddhist context here, because I woke up this morning with, of course, a lot of stuff to clear out as always. But I also had this sentence in my head, the noble truth. And when we do the Buddhist line of thought, it's kind of, there are 4 noble truths. Let us just put that, and I'll refer to them in a moment. But I kind of already explained them. But the noble truth, singular. So why do I wake up with one noble truth? And then I ask myself, what is that noble truth? And this is where it's interesting, because if I had woken up with the 4 noble truths, I would know exactly this is Buddhist light of thought. This is the Buddhist teachings. I'm here dealing with some of the Syrian A type of genetics that leads to, and I do remember this incarnation I had where I died as a Buddhist monk in the 50s. That is rumoring in the background as well. But I wake up with this, the noble truth. And then I'm kind of thinking, what is that? Why is that one noble truth, similarly to as I had that dream with, you remember from earlier on where I talked about the, that dream where I am encountering the devil, as we have been taught in Christianity. And he says, we devils never use the right hand. Again, there it was plural, meaning there are more devils. And after that, I had another dream with different types of devils that existed. So this is just kind of because we always learned that, well, there's the top of the hierarchy and the devil is the leader and everybody below is kind of falling angelics or lesser demons, not the devil. Again, this differentiation between something that we have been taught, and then you get a dream that tells you this is not this is not coincide with reality. There's this in the record. And the same with the noble truth. So I'm contemplating the noble truth. Does that mean, as we're having in Christianity, in Christianity it's said that the highest law of all is technically love others as you would love yourself, or teach others as you want to be treated yourself. This foundational concept of love and using yourself as a center point to have empathy for others, because at the end of the day, how do you want to be treated? And when you read the Gospels, you see this is not the sole law and this is not the sole message in the Gospels, but this is what the church came up with as I would say, to be a little bit harsh here, to push you a little bit, as a control mechanism, using compassion as a control mechanism. You see the same idea of compassion in the later types of Buddhist teachings, where compassion becomes the sole thing, where you have Tara that sits as the female, actually is interesting, that sits as the last one and keeps the door open into nirvana, so to speak. And compassion, that is why she's doing that ultimate sacrifice of keeping the gate open so people can get out when they do the Buddhist teachings. Again, having the savior figure. And you have that purpose in the Bela material, where Sanat Kumara is the one that keeps the gate open, and the Venusian that keeps the gate open, the White Brotherhood that keeps the gate open for humanity to get out, taking that, turning again the female into a male. And Sanat Kumara actually means the little one, and we know our planet is not a holy planet, just to put it that way. Anyways, part of the Bela material, looking into the little bits and pieces and how things get twisted to fit the context of what they want to put. Because the Bela material, remember, Bela was Christian, so she had to have this godlike thing, because she was very focused on godlike things. The English she was a noble person of the aristocrats of England, and she was from that school where the nobility were the physical representation of God, chosen by God, and these kind of things. Ridiculous mindset to give you power because God has chosen you, and therefore you have the license to kill, so to speak, inside this reality. But that's not where I want to go. There's a lot of stuff going on with that one. Just know the context of the different information and why it's given that way. And sometimes I would wish that the Tibetan had chosen someone who was scientific. Why the fuck didn't he choose someone that was scientific? But that was a purpose as well. Perhaps because the majority of people that are doing this to some degree are worshippers and have it in their nature that they need to relate to something. If they are to really do the journey, they need to relate to a God figure or some divine creature, or brotherhood, to put it out of one singular and put it into plural again, the Elohim, which are plural, and get it into this understanding there are deities we can relate to that will govern power in our lives. And as long as we do as the gods are telling us we're doing the right thing, putting us into submission, so to speak. But why that dynamic? Is it because humans need a guideline to do so? They are not good enough in themselves. They need something greater to control them. Or was it because that's how the programs were made by the hijackers, and therefore they played within the programs and engineered as much as they could within the existing programs, where the people that were doing it would then not get completely smacked because they were still submissive in some way or some form? These are again another question to be contemplated on, and by asking the question, I kind of already gave the answer. So some of our questions are kind of having the answer within themselves, what we truly believe in, because our questions will of course also be a reflection of how we think. The questions we ask are a reflection of how we think. So this is also when we do have questions in contemplation, write them down and look at them and say, this is philosophy, are their foundation solid? Are they from the right angle? As in, one asked me about the weather, and then he assumed naturally that the weather was a creation of the original engineering of our habitat. And then you can say, well, how far do you want to go? Is it a original engineering of our habitat after the hijack? Or before the hijackers, prior to the timeline event or after the timeline event? What is weather today? It's a sum of electromagnetic forces. So that kind of gives the answer in itself. Again, what is the foundation? What is our assumption when we ask questions? Our assumption of something, we need to test that as well. Is our assumption correct? That's philosophy. That's the grandness of thinking. You are asking a question, but you ask it from a context. You know it's from a context of thought, and you know it's from a system of thought. And then you ask the question, is it in alignment with your system of thought? And if it is yes, then what is the purpose of that question? To drive the energy of the system of thought further. But when you do that, will it lead to something that has a purpose? Or is it just the driving of the knowledge for the question of the dynamics of the knowledge itself? Because then it just becomes empty knowledge. It has no purpose anymore. It loses its purpose. So with these very philosophical questions, but they are important when we begin the path of progression, because when we begin the path of progression, dynamics are different. These are processes. These are different mythologies. These are different dynamics that we need to master. And there is not the knowledge itself. It's not knowing what you need to know, but always being in the unknown, always moving around in something you don't know what is. And the purpose is not to get the answers. They are just little part goals on the process itself, where you kind of get the knowledge pops up and then you understand, and you can delete the pattern if it has no use, because you're still using the sword of deconstruction on the path of progression, because knowledge has its purpose in one setting, in one line of thought, in one reality. And once you move beyond that one, then it loses its purpose and something else has to be created. So the progression path is all about getting into the unknown and assess the situation and understand what's going on, understand the dynamics, understand the processes, understand the mythology from where you work your way through that step, through that layer, through that part of the vertical pyramid towards and upwards in progression. Here, knowledge becomes something you exemplify. What you learned on the path of liberation, you here can take and adapt into a mythology that makes you run through the progression pyramid. Literally, it makes you run up the steps of the pyramid quickly and easily, because you have learned all of these processes of mind in the right way, in a balance point, and processes of emotions in the balance point, and processes of your physical form in the balance point. And therefore you are going the narrow path, always being in the middle of everything. And that is technically when we talk about the noble truth. The noble truth is not the Four Noble Truths, which I will explain in the next video, but the noble truth is to always be in alignment with your core self and everything there is. And from that level of complete understanding and complete balance, from where you create the correct type of life force, and you have the correct type of understanding and perception and acting, because that's the physical form. It helps you to act with whatever comes your way. Then the noble truth becomes identical with this narrow path of which you walk, where there's only one truth, and that is to continue to evolve, to continue to expand, and continue to walk forward with whatever comes your way, and using whatever you have learned in that process to achieve a new balance and a new type of vital force that will help you to grow. And that is technically what the progression path is all about. Okay, thank you and for this video.